You're listening to Wit in the Word, the podcast where wisdom meets humor, where two friends with one faith dig into Scripture to explore how it shapes and connects us. It's a space for insight, laughter, and some wild deep dives. I'm Annie.
And this is Jessie.
And together, we'll uncover how wit in the Word weave meaning into our lives. Let's get started. All right, everyone, welcome back. This is podcast number 5. We are still hanging out in the new studio, and we have enjoyed the sound quality, so we hope you do too. We are at Star Media Production Studio. So this week on the Get to Know Us section, we've got some hot topic questions. All right, Jess, here we go. Sweet or salty?
Salty.
Just like your personality.
The Bible calls us to be the salt of the earth, so I'm doing it right.
Yeah, no, I like sweet, just like I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, what is your current caffeinated drink of choice?
Even though some child on TikTok says it's childish, Mountain Dew.
Same. She's like calling us out.
She was.
If you're like 40, 50.
You need to drink unsweetened tea, soda water.
Gross.
Pepsi Zero.
So
I don't know if this counts, but my Spotify wrap-up said my age is 19, so I can still drink Mountain Dew.
In case you guys are not aware, this podcast is totally fueled by Mountain Dew. Not a sponsor.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
I am a night owl.
Same.
Yes. This is why we record at night, people.
What was the last show you binged?
Oh, I'm just getting done with Victoria on Netflix. I kind of like the historical accuracy of some of those old ones, just what they wear and all that kind of stuff. So I enjoy those.
Stranger Things and The Promised Land. If you haven't seen The Promised Land, you need to watch it. It's hilarious. It's only on YouTube, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've totally followed that too, and it just reminds me of like The Office, a spin on The Office, and yet in biblical context.
Well, it had me opening my Bible because I was like, okay, was Moses' wife's dad actually there? Turns out he was.
Right.
Didn't know that. I mean, is everything that played out in that show how it actually happened? No, we don't know because the Bible doesn't give us every little detail, but it's a way it could have. And sometimes I laughed. In episode 4, I think I cried. Mm-hmm. It's all over the place.
Yes. So tune into that. That is it for this week's Get to Know Us. Hopefully, if you guys got any questions, you can certainly put it in the comments and we will answer them for you next time.
Yeah. Come up with some really good things for us to talk about in our cold open.
Yeah. And how you want to get to know us a little bit more.
Yeah.
So this week we are going to start in Ruth chapter 3 and we'll see how far we get here.
One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, He poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today."
Okay, so chapter 3.
Let's jump in.
I know we've left off a few weeks ago with Ruth bringing home a bumper crop. I mean, I don't know if the harvest was a bumper crop that year, but she brought home a lot. We also had Boaz, who we were introduced to in those last 2 podcasts, where he's incredibly supportive and helpful to Ruth and made sure that she was taken care of, not only just herself, but also was able to take care of Naomi. So going into verse 1, we now know that the harvest is over. And so how long do you think that harvest lasted?
Probably a month.
Yeah, so I think a couple weeks. You know, a lot of times you read in the Bible and you're like, oh, the next day, okay, this is where we're at. And no, we can see that a few weeks she has been out working for, I think probably a month.
Yeah, because they have 2 harvests a year, and that means they have to plant, grow, harvest. So
okay. And so then one day after the harvest is over, Naomi says to Ruth, "My daughter, I must find a home." I know, what does your version say?
Mine says, "Should I not find a suitable home, rest, husband, secure place for you?"
Yeah, so I kind of looked into that, and where it talks about like the security and the rest, that takes us back to 1. Wasn't that chapter 1 moving into 2, where
possibly,
you know, you have to find rest in a husband. And I think when we last talked about that, you and I both, like as women on this little podcast journey, were like, this is not something we can relate to, because in our current time, we don't need men to find rest in. And so I kind of wanted to figure out a little bit more, what does that really mean? So if you go all the way back to the Hebrew word of that, which is the same word. So that word for rest and security, as you said, they're the same word. And that is menukach, meaning settled rest or a secure place to put down burdens, typically linked to God's provision. So I think this is a much better way to think about their situation, instead of being like, oh, you have to have a man or else you can't do anything, which is where we went. Instead of being like accused that we're just being feminists. You know,
I mean, somebody did say that our podcast was leaning a little feminist, and I said, it's going to get worse.
The reality is at this time, obviously it was hard for them to take care of themselves, but looking at that deeper meaning, it's kind of God's plan for them was to find that rest that same way that he looks at like you and I, that we can find that in God. It's that same kind of rest and security.
I hear what you're saying, but I think more of it, I guess, as that if marriage is supposed to be this covenant, that's a reflection of our covenant with God. Wives should find this rest in their husbands, and husbands should also find this rest in their wives.
Right. I mean, this is how relationships were supposed to be modeled. That is where this word root comes from. And so I think if you're not necessarily finding that rest or that same model of how God wants it to be, then there's probably sin entered in, right?
Right. And that's where I think I struggled with this a little bit, is because the woman has to find rest in the husband, but it doesn't say in here that the husband has to find rest in the wife. And I think that's where there's maybe a little bit of a disconnect. Whereas I think that is God's plan, is that we lean on each other in the way that we both need to rely on God, instead of just one person being the rest and the other person not being able to find it.
Yeah, so I think in the Old Testament, we read this incredibly one-sided. Mm-hmm. And that's where just looking back at the root of the meaning of that word, putting rest and security in the same meaning, it's like, okay, that makes more sense. But we do still struggle with that. Then why were men the only place to find that rest and security? But I did find it as a richer meaning to look at the actual Hebrew versus our feminist way. Like, we don't need no man.
I mean, we could go into a bigger topic here about whether patriarchy was God's original plan or not.
I mean,
and we're not going to go there today.
Yeah, we're not. But just knowing that I found deeper meaning in it than where we were at the beginning. So,
Annie, you're such a bad feminist.
I never claimed to be one.
Sorry, I'm not going to say that. I want to say something nice. I'd be like,
I never claimed to
Annie,
be one.
I want to say something nice. So like, Annie, thanks for redeeming that.
Yeah, there you go. So another thing wild to think about is that you go all the way from chapter 1 with Naomi and where she's at this end of the world, my life is over kind of thing. And now we get to go here in the beginning of 1 and see her have a plan and have kind of a future for Ruth. So you have Naomi with this plan.
So yes, Naomi is being a matchmaker here, which is very practical. And I do want to throw out Proverbs 16:9 here. Like, it's good and it's okay to make plans, but we need to remember to be practical and flexible because we never know what God's plans are. You don't want to go get so set in your plans that you don't leave room for God. So she's doing that, and she's then going to give Ruth 3 steps, basically, that she needs to do. She needs to wash up and put on perfume and good clothes. She needs to let Boaz eat and drink and enjoy the feast. And when he lies down, she needs to go lift the cover off of his feet.
So as we've kind of talked throughout the book of Ruth, there is stuff that you read and it's just surface level and you're like, okay, this is what we're reading here. But the book also has a whole nother level that we have to deep dive into. And so when we look at this advice here, we talk about number 1, that's also how we're called to be in faith. Mm-hmm. So when we come to faith, when we say that Jesus is the Lord of our life, we need to get cleaned up. And that's just a process we do over and over and over again. And then from there, we're to anoint ourselves, just as she was instructed to put on perfume. You're to anoint yourselves with the Spirit. And so if we're to go out and do the work that God calls us to do, we can't do that on our own. We need to have the Spirit present in our lives. And then lastly, we're going to put on our best clothes. And so that's just a representation of how we look, how we go out and do the things that we do. So this is all just showing just another level of where we take our faith.
Okay, so we see in these 3 steps, you're saying that there's like a practical application of how to get a man. Mm-hmm. And then there's a spiritual application on how we are to live.
Right.
Okay, so keep going.
So number 2, what's our practical application here? Our practical is Naomi's been married. She was married a lot longer than Ruth. So here she's giving her advice saying, you got to let that man eat and you got to let him drink so then he's happy. Like if you try to have a hard conversation with a man who's hungry, it ain't going to go well at all. So that's probably the practical part of this. I mean, you could go even deeper into like drink as in like, is he supposed to be drunk? Like, what is that? Like, what's going on here? And so you could go there, but I kind of liked that original like thought process of like, just he's happy because he ate and his stomach is full. So now you can have a hard conversation with him.
And then what is our spiritual application?
So I think the spiritual application is that we are to eat and drink at the table with the Lord's Supper. So Boaz represents, as we've talked about throughout, the Redeemer. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. So on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he had the Last Supper with his people, the disciples, and he ate with them. He broke bread and he drank. He said, this is my body, this is my blood.
Okay. And then we get to 3, where he lies down and you go lift the cover off his feet. Practically.
What do you got for practical?
Practically, maybe it's because in the middle of the night, like if you take the cover off, like his feet would get cold and then he'd wake up and he'd have to have a conversation.
Could be.
Or maybe laying at someone's feet is kind of an act of submission. So it could be part of her physically showing she's willing to submit to Boaz as her kinsman redeemer. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to say spiritually what would be going on.
I think a place to think about is also take us to the Last Supper. What is something that, Jesus does? Feet represents the servant part. So like kind of the same thing that you said, but she's placing herself at his feet. She's coming in as a humble servant.
Right.
So spiritually, that's that same thing that we're called to do. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Should have been the opposite, but he came to serve, not to be served. So it's that same spiritual connection there.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
If you were Naomi, though, came from another culture, this would be the wildest thing someone ever told you to do.
If somebody said, hey, go to where there's a feast, maybe possibly a party, going on in the middle of the night, get looking real good, and then just take off somebody's foot covering and sit there or lay there, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Right. Because I mean, like, my brain obviously sometimes goes to the gutter. That's because I'm not the best person in the world. But I'm like, okay, first off, I mean, let him get drunk and then see his feet. I'm like, what is that?
Right. So, like, does Naomi really have Ruth's best interest in mind? Is she saying, like, you should tempt Boaz? Is she saying you should try and get pregnant? Is she saying, like, you should maybe imply even that something happened so that he has to do something? Or what is Naomi doing? What is she saying? And then who do we listen to? Who do we trust? Say Naomi is her elder. Ruth should be listening to her, even though this advice sounds absolutely wild.
Yeah, I mean, and up till this point, she has remained very faithful to Naomi. So it's like, I don't think she's going to question it. But for you and I, when we're first reading through it, I mean, granted, we gave you the practical and we gave you the spiritual. But I was like, but when I first read through it, I was like, what is this?
I mean, because there's so much more even going on behind the scenes when we talked about that this book has layers. I mean, we've talked a little bit before about how the Moabites bring in like a sexual tension element, and because they also got drunk and slept with their father. Okay. Then we have Boaz's relatives, which would be
Tamar.
Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38, where again, we have this thing set up where Tamar marries one of Judah's sons. He dies. Actually, God kills him because he's so evil. Then because of love-right marriage, she marries the second son. Basically sleeps with her and spills his seed so he can't get her pregnant. And God's like, that's also gross. Kills him. And then...
Great story.
So Judah has one son left. And he's like, he's going to get killed by the Lord too if he marries Tamar. So he says, hey, Tamar, why don't you go stay in your father's house until my youngest son is actually old enough to be married? And she's like, yeah, sure, okay. Story goes on. He basically hides his son away and doesn't have him actually marry Tamar, even though they're technically betrothed. But she hears that Judah's coming around town to do something, I think with sheep or goats.
Okay.
Whatever, to sell things. And she basically takes off her widow clothing, puts on a veil, so he assumes she's a prostitute, and they sleep together. And then he tries to get her burned alive because she's pregnant. And then she's like, but actually, father-in-law, this is your child. And it's a whole thing. But again, it's a whole setup of like, this is Boaz's relatives, where there was this trickery, this play where she pretended to be something that she wasn't to get pregnant, to get her self-redeemed because Judah would not redeem her in the way that he was supposed to. So we've got the drinking, we've got the
kind of manipulation a little bit.
Kind of manipulation. And then we also have the word lie, 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 lay, 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 which is the etymology or the lexicon that is often used in the Bible to signify sex. And it said 3 times in Naomi's instructions to Ruth, and then 3 times in Ruth's actual visit to Boaz. And so you have all of this tension that maybe today's readers wouldn't know or wouldn't pick up on, but the people of the Old Testament, they would have understood the will they, won't they tension that's happening in the story.
Which is interesting, because how do you then interpret that? You know, like, do you go with good intentions? And this is why I'm telling you all of this? Or do you go with, like, this manipulative tension? And it's...
I don't know if I can
the
speak
wrong
for
way.
her intention, but
I know.
I do think what it does tell us or does signify for us is even with all this tension and will they, won't they, and this sexual stuff, neither Boaz or Ruth, like, succumb to it.
Right.
So even though all of this is happening behind the scenes, there's this stuff going on, they rise above it.
That's true. That's true.
And it just shows their character and how much they love God and trust God and are willing to do the right thing, even in situations where a bunch of people in their family had not done the right thing in the previously.
Like breaking some generational curses.
Breaking generational curses. They're just cutting those off and being like, nope, I'm not going to do the things of my forefathers.
Yeah, we're trusting God's plan in this. So even though there's all that tension and your brain totally reads it and is like, why this place? What does this look like? Which we didn't dive into when we talked about the threshing floor.
Yeah, we didn't even get into that.
No. And so knowing that the threshing floor was always a place that was outside of the city, And so for her to intentionally like go outside, there had to be a lot of trust. Because she, again, is putting herself in a situation that is not necessarily the safest situation. Because as I read that, I'm like, something has to happen on the threshing floor. These men go there, they sleep there at night. My mind was going.
Okay, so Hosea 9 verse 1, it talks about how there were often prostitutes on the threshing floor after the feast. Because there's basically a bunch of men there with money to spend and they are drunk.
And it's away from the town. So like the evil is outside of the town.
It's one of those things where it's not all of the men did it, but that there was the option that there would be prostitutes there and there wouldn't be women there. And so generally if the woman was there, it would be assumed she was there to
be a prostitute.
So a little bit of the process is we talked about how the threshing floor would be away from the town. It would generally be out on this area made of bedrock and near the fields. And it would work by they would take these 5-pronged fork rake things called a fan, and they'd scoop up the barley, throw it into the air. The wind would come and blow away the chaff, and the grain would fall down to the ground. And then the grain would be either trampled by animals or hit with a sledge, like you read in Micah 4:13, or crushed under the wheels of a cart, like you would read in Isaiah 28:28. And even just that process is an allegory. It mirrors the story of what's happening so far.
Right. So that totally directs us to the New Testament. And it brings up the verse Luke 3 verses 17. It says, his winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. And so here, the threshing floor, yes, we've talked about what it is, what it looks like, but now we look at the allegory and the symbolic part of it, and that is saying, like, the threshing floor is where God takes his people through hard times, and it's going to separate the righteous from the unrighteous. So it's that same, like, difficult, hard process, and the chaff is basically essentially the people that are evil. Separate the chaff from the wheat, and the wheat is the harvest. And so it's that representative that God is going to separate the people who are right in his eyes from the people who continue to do evil. And so this threshing floor represents so much more than just literally just going out to the threshing.
Right. Because again, we are seeing the practical application of what the threshing floor means in the story, and then spiritually what it means for us in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, God allows us to go through hard times because that molds and that shapes and that forms us. And as we keep going and we see what Ruth chooses to do on the threshing floor, we understand that that is an example of what we're also called to do. And so let's get back to the story. The next thing is that Ruth says, we're all the way back to verse 5 here. I'll do whatever you say. So she goes down to the threshing floor and she does everything that her mother-in-law told her to do. So she's being obedient, regardless of how crazy it is. And so Boaz, just as Naomi predicted, in verse 7, he finishes eating and drinking, and he's in good spirits. He went over to lie down on the far end of the grain pile. Why is she right? Like, why would he stay there? That's something we haven't talked about yet, because that's also part of the crazy story. It's like, who sleeps at the threshing floor? We didn't go there.
They actually all sleep at the threshing floor. Well, I shouldn't say all. The majority of them will stay at the threshing floor because they want to protect their grain from the thieves. So they basically would sleep in like a spoke. They'd have the grain in the middle, heads in the middle, feet out, all around the grain pile to protect it from thieves. And so that is why they're having their feast out there. They're being drunk, they're being merry, and then they stay at the threshing floor.
Yeah, so remember, we're in the time of the judges. And so that's where people just do whatever they please. And so they have to protect their harvest, potentially also like kind of waiting in line for their turn. So that's part of the process of why they're staying there. So Naomi was fully aware of that. It's just a unique thing that when she gave those instructions, why would he stay there? Why would he sleep there? So she was aware that that's what the men did. And so we're seeing that happen, and Boaz does exactly that. And so Ruth then approaches him quietly, uncovers his feet, and lays down. And in the middle of the night, something startles Boaz, and he turns.
Mine says startled or shuddered, so maybe it's just that his feet were cold.
Could be.
Could be.
The actual theory, very simple.
We don't know.
I'm assuming, though, it's dark. And so that startled, like, not being able to see around. He doesn't quite know what is there, who is there, what does this look like.
But it feels to me like there's time between when she lays down and when she wakes up. Like that it's not immediate.
Right. No. I think he's sleeping and he
Okay.
like startles awake. But then like I imagine him like looking around and he can't, we see he can't tell who's there.
Right.
But then thinking like for me, like, oh, well, there's prostitutes there and all this other stuff. Like he really doesn't know who's at his feet. And Boaz being Boaz wouldn't want to succumb to any of that stuff. And so we do see he doesn't recognize her. So he says, who are you?
She says, I am Ruth, your servant girl. Spread your cover over me. Or like mine says, the corner of your garment or your wings, which when we talked about earlier, about how there's all of these verses of God using wings and the allegory of birds of protection and security. And that's kind of what she's saying to him. Basically, she's saying, will you marry me? In Bible language.
Right.
Because you are a relative who was supposed to take care of me. So that I am Ruth, your servant girl. Spread your cover over me. Or mine says, spread your cover or the corner of your garment or your wings over me. How we have talked about that before, how God uses wings and birds as this metaphor for protection, security. And she says, because you are a relative who is supposed to take care of me. So basically she's saying, will you marry me? And we will just have to wait and see what he says next week. Thanks for joining us on Wit and the Word, where we explore how meaning, context, and language shape our understanding of Scripture. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, keep your wit sharp and your words full of life-giving encouragement, hope, love, and truth.